For anyone who thought our society was moving into a period of UFO disclosure, I don't want to burst your bubble, but I do want to bring in a few dissenting notions. In the first place, look, we all get it. We all understand why some of us would be excited that after years and decades and a whole human lifetime of total denial on the reality of UFOs or UAP, they're getting any recognition at all from our dominant institutions like the New York Times. That's definitely important. And yes, it's perfectly okay to take the win and enjoy the moment. I'm sure it made Thanksgiving and the holiday get togethers with the family a little more interesting. Well, when we were allowed to have those. So, yes, UAP are out there, and several powerful insiders have acknowledged them and they've said, we don't know what these are. So, okay, sure, you can call that progress. But ask yourself a question. When we talk about government disclosure of UFOs, what exactly are we talking about? It used to be a simple idea. Disclosure didn't have to be complicated. It was just the government, and let's face it, the United States government, acknowledging that UFOs are real. That was it. We heard this for years. Very simple formula. And honestly, I bought into that as much as anyone else, at least in the idea of that being disclosure. But we can kind of see today that this way of looking at it is way too simple. We've basically gotten to that point. Okay, not exactly 100%, but pretty darn close. We have the Navy telling us that they encounter these things. They've acknowledged several videos. They've told us that they're updating their procedures when they encounter them. That's kind of an admission, right? Well, yes, except for the fact that no one is speculating as to what these things can be. So you still have skeptics out there saying, oh, this could all be electronics glitches or drone aircraft or even the Chinese or the Russians. The major media, with very few exceptions, doesn't ask anything probing or inquisitive on the matter. They're incapable of that, so we continue to dance around this subject. Meanwhile, UFO research, that continues onward. Serious researchers continue to make major headway on, for example, the famous Davis-Wilson notes, which of course discusses the deep nature of the UFO cover-up. There's been an increasing number of scattered admissions as well of the reality of crash retrievals of UFOs, including the book Trinity, which deals with what seems to be a significant UFO crash retrieval from 1945. And there are several other serious studies out there dealing with some of the stranger aspects of this phenomenon. And just good journalism out there, not by mainstream journalists by and large, but by professionals who've done their own deep dive and found important new data to reveal to us. There's a number of good new YouTube channels on this subject that are smart and they go deep into this. And in fact, there's a growing number of good young researchers and journalists who are eagerly diving into this subject. You wouldn't know any of that from our establishment news coverage. Of course, what else is new? But my point is that in terms of moving this subject ahead, we're not getting any help from the controlled establishment media. By and large, that institution's still holding this subject back, even after these last 4 years. And I say this in part to all those people who, a few years ago, were screaming disinfo when the first major coverage on this started back in 2017. And they were all claiming that this new UFO coverage was only a smokescreen for the military-industrial complex, that they were planning to scare you into thinking that there are hostile aliens so you would go running to the government and give the military even more money. Well, my question is, where the hell is the media coordination for any of this? Kind of fell flat, didn't it? Yes, it did. The problem isn't that we're being led to believe in hostile aliens, because we aren't being led to believe that. In fact, exactly the opposite. The entire subject continues to be downplayed at nearly every opportunity. The information that came out when it did, starting 2017, that happened because a few dedicated people were able to fight to get it out. And there's been major resistance ever since. So let me ask you a question. How far do you think any disclosure process will go? Officially, that is. What's the US government willing to admit? Do you think they will willingly admit that they've been encountering these objects for decades and decades? Because we know they have. Try getting them to say that. You think they'll acknowledge they've got parts of a flying saucer, or the whole thing maybe, or several of them, that they've been studying them for years, trying to reverse engineer them? Well, good luck with that. Despite the fact that this has been an open secret for years now. They won't willingly admit this because that's a pure admission of a cover-up right there. I mean, hell, you're not supposed to believe in any conspiracy theories anymore. You think in this current environment of total public and government insanity that the United States government is going to cop to the greatest conspiracy theory of all time? And ask yourself how far the UFO reality might just go. Because there's a long, long road ahead from the position of saying there's something out there that we can't explain. To me, it looks like they pulled a nice move. Pushed into a corner of having to admit something, you got the talking heads in the government, helped of course by big media. They did a great move. They made the most basic of admissions and just moved the goalposts a little bit. New admission, same old cover up. There's still no discussion about the obvious presence of other intelligences here, now operating on this world. No discussion of the deeply illegal nature of so much of this cover up, something locked away not just from the American people and the world population, but by nearly all responsible government and military officials as well, to say nothing of Congress and Senate and all that. And that's because when you live in a world of enforced fictions and carefully cultivated insanity, well, dropping a real truth bomb like UFO disclosure, that wouldn't just screw with their own plans for implementing what's now quite obviously a global revolution. It's pretty obvious to see. But it would put some of those very people implementing that plan at professional and maybe personal risk. Any genuine UFO disclosure won't come from them. It's got to come from us. And not disclosure, but exposure.